Hello and welcome to this guide about how to put together all the scaled production lines for the Dyson Sphere construction. We're going to be going through all of the required production lines to put together the Dyson shell, like one of the Dyson shells, at a very, very high rate. For the solar cells, it's going to be 14,400 solar cells per minute, which is basically 240 per second. The reason that we picked that target is because that's the maximum that you can actually reasonably launch from one planet with EM rail ejectors on the whole planet, right? For the small carrier rockets, I haven't quite figured out how much we're going to do for that yet. So we'll discuss that later after I've thought through it a little bit. But the first thing that we're going to do is look at these solar cells and look at what it takes to actually produce the 14,500 solar cells per minute, or 240 per second. Okay, so let's first figure out what a solar cell is made of, and then we can make sure that we have all of the basic materials put together and also assemble it to the next stages, right? So the recipes is that one graphene and one photon combiner produce 2 solar cells in 4 seconds in one assembler, right? So that basically means that half a graphene and half a photon combiner is enough for 1 solar cell. That's kind of one of the important information we grab out of this. Okay, so then we have to find a way to satisfy these inputs, right? And graphene is going to be produced from fire ice, and basically 1 fire ice produces 1 graphene and some spare hydrogen, which we'll forget about because we don't need it. Okay. And then we have to do the same for the photon combiner. So the way that the photon combiners work is that 1 circuit board and 1 optical grating crystal produce 1 photon combiner, right? So we just need to figure out, we need to get circuit boards and optical grating crystals. Now the optical grating crystal is going to be a raw material, so we have already sort of arrived at where we need that, so we just need to have enough of that available in our system. And then the circuit board, of course, has to be created, and it takes 2 iron ingot and 1 copper ingot to produce 2 circuit boards, right? Okay, so those are all the recipes that we're going to need for the solar cell. Now the small carrier rocket is going to be more complicated, but again, we're going to leave that to later. So the next question to think about is actually, okay, given that this is what the rates are, so to be able to produce 240 solar cells per second, what are the per second rates for each of these materials, right? So the way to figure that out is that decomposing the solar cell into its sort of components, right? So for 240 solar cells, we need 120 graphene, for which we'll need 120 fire ice. And we'll also need 120 photon combiners, which means that we need 120 circuit boards, we need 120 iron ingots and 60 copper ingots, and then 120 optical grating crystal, right? So these are basically the per second rates that we need to produce 240 per second of these solar cells. So that's the overview. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is look at each of these production lines, and you'll find links to blueprints in the description for each of these. So the first 2 that we're going to look at is these iron ingots and the copper ingots. Now, the way that I've divvied up the planets for me is that I have 1 assembling planet, 1 chemical planet, and 1 smelting planet, right? So we're going to look at the iron ingot and the copper ingot to begin with, because we're already at the smelting planet. The other thing to note is that these are the minimum rates. I'm going to probably put together far higher rates than this by just sort of putting together an entire factory. And, you know, if 1 factory is enough, then I'll put down multiple. But if 1 factory produces more than enough, then I'm still going to produce 1 entire factory. Okay, so let's start with the iron ingot and the copper ingot. Actually, they work in a very similar way. So the overall idea of these production lines is that we're going to be using 4 stacked inputs and get 4 stacked outputs. Now, at the moment, maybe there'll change this in the future, but at the moment, the sorters will only output 1 item at a time. So unfortunately, you have to come up with complex arrangements of these automatic pilers to be able to get to the 4 stack, right? Now, the key question is, how many do you need to produce one single full 30 per second output, and then you just have to follow this sort of stacking arrangement that we have here to get it to a full 4 stack. So to get to one full output belt, you basically need 8 of 7.5, but in actuality 8, right? And the way that we've come up with that is that these are on a 1 second cycle, right? So if we're sort of on standard, then we would need 30 of these smelters, but we're using the Mk.II smelters here, which are twice as fast, so that already takes us from needing 30 to only 15. And then we're also using proliferation to go to 100% production speed up. So then we go from 15 to 7.5, right? So then we need 7.5 of these, I guess, smelters here, right? And then the way that we have come up with the stacking, but I mean, you can do it in whatever way that you want. We'll start from the back, because that's the easiest. Right, so this is just a standard output line. And then once we're done here, we delete an automatic piler, and then we get 2 per second. Actually, I'm gonna try to demonstrate this by just deleting all of these materials. Hopefully this starts running, and then you'll see the theory. Okay. These are going too fast. These are supposed to produce half belts, so right. So you have one full belt of single stacked, right? And then this gets you to a half belt of half stacked. It's kind of hard to see, but there's only going to be half the slots that I used up here, right? And then the second line here is going to do the same, but then we have a piler, and it's already full again. It's already produced 20,000. So then here we have we have 2 belts going at half the rate of double stacked, right? So then we just use one of these splitters and combine them. Now, these splitters, you just press tab a couple of times, and then you get these vertical splitters, right? And then we need to go from double stacked to quad stacked, right? Because that's the only way to get to quad stacked. Now, and then we have this arrangement again, and then we just carry forward all of it, and then we combine the 2 half belts of quad stacked into the output. And you can see like how ridiculously fast these things go, right? Like we deleted it, and almost instantly they had produced another 20,000. So yeah, that's how the iron ingot works. The copper ingot works exactly the same, except that we of course use the copper ingot recipe. So yeah, if you are looking for those recipes, you just go into the description, and then you'll find a link to the Dyson Sphere, and then here you'll get the copper ingot and the iron ingot recipes. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to look at is the chemistry here. But for that, I need to change planets and set up a few things and so on, so I'll be back once I have that done. One moment, please. Okay, welcome back. We have just put together this graphene production here. Now, we only actually have to produce 120 per second. But I chose to actually produce 28,800 per minute, which is 480 per second, because that's the sort of standard production belt that these guys have, which is one input produces one output, right, of graphene, and then you also have hydrogen, and then it's basically 4 lanes of it. Now, I've changed the way that I do this, and I think I want to adopt this approach going forward because it's far more straightforward to understand, and it's far more obvious what's going on. I'm not going to go back and change the others, but any future ones that I put together, I'm probably going to use this pattern here, right? So we have this spray coater stage, and then we have this stage, which essentially combines. Let's see that this is already full. I deleted it just before I started, and then it's already full. It's absolutely crazy. But then we have this stage that converts 4 half belts that are double stacked into one belt that is quad stacked, right? So we have this conveyor stage here that combines the two, then we have a stacker stage, and we have another merger state. Let me just delete this again, then you'll be able to see it working. And then the rest is pretty standard. I mean, it's the same as before, right? Like you have one input, one output, you share one of these inputs, one of the output lanes, in this case hydrogen, because the recipe is 1 hydrogen for every 2 fire ice. And then the other question is, how many of these do we need? Well, they output 1 per second. So we could do 30, but then we have a proliferation, which does 100% production speed up, which means that we only need 15. So each one of these has 15 on it, and then we essentially have, I'll show you the end because that's the easiest to understand. To see, we essentially have these 3 lanes that get stacked, and then they get lifted all the way to the top. So in the first one at the end, we actually have 4 belts, 3 that are raised. If we look here, 3 that are raised, and of course the one on the ground, and there's one. The first one needs to be raised twice, because it has to clear the stackers, the automatic pilers. But yeah, that's how this production line works. So you'll be able to find that in the description again, under these blueprints, in the Dyson Sphere one, this graphene blueprint makes it all work. You can see that we have 240 chemical plants in here, which is a lot, which tells you that we are actually producing 480 per minute. So yeah, the next stage is that we need to go to our assembling planet, and we need to put together the circuit boards and the optical and the photon combiner. So I'll be back when we've put that together. Okay, now we have completed the circuit board, and that's all working. Look at all of this. This is amazing. You can see the crazy rates, and these are production rates, right? So it works in a very similar way as before. Like we have this stage where it does the stacking, the spraying, and the merging, and then we share the copper line, but we don't share the output and the iron ingot, and that's because the recipe is like this. Like it only needs 1 iron ingot, and it produces 2 circuit boards from that. 1 copper ingot produces 2 circuit boards. Now, let's run out of this, but that's fine. That's why we're doing all of this carrier logistics research. And then normally these produce at 2 per second, as you can see, which means that we would put 30 of these down by default, but then these Mk.III assemblers have a 1.5 times production speed up, so we would only need 15, and then we have 100% production speed up, so we only need 5 of them. Did I get that right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No. Okay, let me try that again. These produce 2 per second, so we only need 15, right? And then these buildings have a 1.5 times speed up, so we only need 10 because we're using Mk.III. And then because of the production speed up doubling, it goes to 5. So then this is all we need for a single 30 per second line, right? And then we just need to stack them up. We need like 4 of them, stack them up, and then combine them here to a single 4 stack line, and then of course apply proliferate. So that's the way to do circuit boards. The next step is to actually produce the solar cells. Although I've made some mistake here. no, the next step is to produce the Photon Combiner. So yeah, we're going to do that next. Sort of for the purpose of the guide, I'll be back once I've done that. Okay, welcome back. We have just completed the Photon Combiner. Now, this one here is only a 3-laned factory, and the reason for that is because each lane requires 2 inputs and 1 output, which is 3, and they're balanced, so there's no way of sort of combining any of the inputs and outputs. Let's delete this so you can watch it work. So that means that if we also need to apply proliferate, we can't do the 4th one. It doesn't really matter, we only need 120 per second, which is in fact a single lane, so we have 3 times more than we need here anyway. And, you know, some of this is kind of expensive as well. You know, this optical grating crystal and that sort of stuff is not cheap. So yeah, it works in a very similar way to the circuit boards, except none of the inputs are shared. So other than that, it's basically the same. The other thing to note is that, you know, these are on a 3-second production cycle. So by default, you would need 90 assemblers, but then we're using Mk.III, so we only need 60. And then we're also applying this production speed up, so we only need 30. Well, when I say only, but so one of these lanes that produces a full output lane is basically 30 assemblers. And then we have our standard stacking arrangement here. So yeah, that's how the Photon Combiner works. The next step is the solar cell. So we're gonna get to building that, and I'll check back in with you once we've done that. Okay, I've actually decided that this guide is just going to be about the solar cells and launching the solar cells. We're not going to be doing the small carrier rockets. And the other thing that it turns out is that we're not going to be doing 240 per second. We're going to actually be doing 480 per second. So there you go, another bonus. 28.8 thousand solar cells per minute. I don't know if we're going to be able to launch them, but they are going to be 3 times proliferated. So choose proliferate in the corresponding production facility. I assume this means that the launch rate will be doubled. So that's actually handy that we also have twice the number of solar cells that we were targeting. But yeah, this production line works in a slightly new way. So we have a shared input line and then not a shared output line. But other than that, it works in exactly the same way. We proliferate it and so on, and then we combine it and stack it, and that's already full again. As you can tell, it takes them less than a minute to fill up this whole thing. And in fact, if there's storage, you know. And then the other thing to note is that, of course, this produces 1 every 2 seconds. So we would need 60 of these assemblers by default, but then we get to divide by 1.5 because of the Mk.IIIs that we're using. So we only need 40, and then of course we've applied 100% production speed up. This is 25% because it probably, you know, you can see that the graphene isn't 3x proliferated yet, but it'll get to 100% once everything sort of reaches the long-term state. And that's why we need 20 of these guys. But yeah, so far we have put together all of the production lines to produce 28,800 solar cells per minute. The next step is that we're going to go and launch all of those solar cells. So for that, we actually need to change solar system, and I also need to do a little bit of building, but I'll be back once we have that. Okay, now that we have finished creating the solar cells, the last step is to actually launch them. And what we've done on this planet is that we have filled up the entire planet with EM rail ejectors. And they're now being launched, which is quite a spectacle. You can see the insane amount of solar cells getting launched here. into orbit. There is a blueprint in the description for, if you look in the Dyson Sphere folder, the EM rail ejectors. This is an entire planet's worth of EM rail ejectors, 2,056 of them. So use with care. And yeah, basically we had to find a way to boost the delivery rate. So we have 3 of these logistics stations. And I've also just included the proliferate here to make sure that these are proliferated. And what you can see is that they just shoot them up faster. So that's how that works. And basically the same as on the other side. The fuel that we are using is the artificial stars. And you can see that we are consuming, what, about 3.3 gigawatts. So you have to have quite a decent energy supply to be able to launch at this sort of rate. Especially because these are going at twice the normal rate. The other thing you might be interested in is that we have 100 gigawatts, just casually, in just solar cells swarming this. And we've only just started launching them. So this is probably going to 200 or maybe 300 gigawatts just with solar cells, which is quite insane in terms of the amount of solar cells that that we have in orbit here. But yeah, of course, the Dyson shell is going to, you know, be the ultimate goal. But anyway, for the purpose of this video, that's it. Again, you'll find all of the blueprints that you know, that we spoke about in the description, and you can build this for yourself. Although keep in mind that this is insanely expensive in terms of resources. So yeah. Anyway, thank you for watching, and until next time, bye.